Thanks, John. Sorry that Cindy's under the weather and can't be here, but not only is Cindy under the weather, but her two canines that she's responsible for are under the weather too. So I said, what have you all been eating? We have, I have to try to get used to this. We have four new members. Are we on? I know. Is that better? Sorry, I always tend to step away from it or so. So let's see where our members are. Maybe I'm holding it the wrong way. Okay, so actually we have 4 new members that need your vote to become new members today. We have Allison Fassel. She's a DC native. Her great-great-great-grandfather, John Edward Chapman, happened to be an AOI member, and she learned about the organization through our webpage. Joel Schrag is here, new member. He was brought on board by Joe Prefontaine, so we welcome him. We have Kathleen Wilson, and she's here today, I believe, right? Is Kathleen here? I thought she was. I thought there was a Wilson here. Who, someone's pointing? No, well, anyhow, Kathleen Wilson. She moved to D.C. in 1990. She lives on Capitol Hill, loves D.C. history. She found out about us on the web. And finally today, Lamont Mitchell, who's a native Washingtonian. Lamont, can you wave in the back there? He's with us today. He's a business owner. He's currently the chairman of the Anacostia Coordinating Council. And our old friend and longtime member Phil Pinnell has brought Lamont on and introduced him to our ranks. So those are 4 new members. We need a motion and a vote to accept them. Okay, we have a first, we have a second. From over here at Gay, always multiple seconds. Well, I don't think we're going to hear any objections, so can we just have an acceptance by acclamation? Okay, well, welcome to our 4 new members. Okay, this next part's going to be kind of hard for me. Okay, so when JR was bringing out stuff for Rick and me to man the table today, he brought out this historic photo of the D.C. War Memorial. This is probably its dedication. And those of you that have had any long time connection with AOI know that we fought very long and hard to make sure that the D.C. War Memorial down on Ash Grove on Independence Avenue remained D.C.'s War Memorial because there was an effort to nationalize it, which was then moved to Constitution Gardens, and we were always making the case, we'll just use Pershing Park, that's the National World War I. So anyhow, so the new World War I Memorial is at the rehabbed Pershing Park. So that is the National World War I Memorial. This one, of course, is the District of Columbia War Memorial. And it got a little bit of news coverage recently, you may have seen on the news, because the secret handshake protest group got a permit from the National Park Service and erected 3 video games at the D.C. War Memorial, okay, to protest the war or the combat, the operation in Iran. So here was our old D.C. War Memorial in the news, maybe not for the reasons that we really would have wanted, but at least it got some exposure. Lots of people are married down there or have their wedding photographs taken, and it's amazing. Well, one of our friends who probably would not like to have seen that public First Amendment right display down there was a lover of the D.C. War Memorial, and that's Carl Cole. Carl was at our last lunch. He was sitting right there. I got pictures of him and Risa and all. And a week later, Carl died in his sleep on April 30th. No one knew it. There's no obituary. His service and all is this Saturday, the 23rd. I put it on our website, but I was trying to provide the family some privacy because, for whatever reason, there was no obituary or no formal announcement. So just to put that, well, I'll come back to that. So, you know, our hearts go out to his wife, Risa, his grandson, Bryant, who's spoken and asked questions and all here before, and Alan and Monica. Carl was involved in so many organizations. numerous waterfront commissions. I could never keep track of the Anacostia Waterfront Commission, Potomac Waterfront, Washington Channel Waterfront Commission. He was on every anything having to do with water, Carl was involved with. He was with the National Maritime Heritage Foundation. They have a 65-foot schooner, the American Spirit, that Carl took AOI members on a field trip back in 2006 or so, and we sailed up and down the Potomac and all. And that's also, part of that is DC Sail, which is a nonprofit organization promoting youth involvement in sailing, and of course, Carl's love of the Capitol Yacht Club. He loved the district's 3 public golf courses and was just outraged about all the attempts to take over and dumping of the East Wing stuff on the East Potomac Park Golf Course. He had many opinions about that. His grandson, Bryant, actually worked for the Park Service concession at the golf course for, I think, 20 years or so, Bryant told me. He was also on the Humanities Commission, not the council, the Humanities Commission. He was served on the Historical Society of DC as a trustee, and of course, 15 years as a director here with the AOI. And here are some of my fond memories of Carl. When I first really remembered seeing him was when AOI had our Bring Back the Alexander Shepard statue down at a place of prominence. And I thought, so I'll share this with you because you all know I'm kind of quirky too. I thought, now who is this black guy with the cowboy hat and the cowboy boots and the jeans and making no bones about him being a Republican? All these things just didn't quite add up. But then I learned more and more and more about Carl. And here's our group protest for Bring Back the Governor Shepard statue. Here's Carl making a presentation down at the Pier 7 at one of our meetings. Here's Carl, he's not really chronological, but here he is at the Capitol Skyline Hotel. We have some great pictures of him. Here from our gala, and look, let me go back. And look, there's John Kelly, who's with us today, right there. And Judy Hubbard, you recognize a lot of faces, Carl and me, John Gill, Nelson, here's Nelson and Carl. A lot of these were at our gala. Here's Carl presenting the check for $25,000 to the Military Road School Preservation Trust at our gala. Look, here's Carol Schwartz. Carol. And Juliet Smith and Carl. And here's a real crew. So here's Seymour Selig, who was our secretary for years. Carl, these were back down at the Pier 7. Sherwood Smith, my sister Hewlett, the past secretary, she's here today, and me. So, you know, Carl was really something. Here's a great picture of he and Risa, he and his family, along with Ro Quander. This was taken last year. Ro has also left us. Here he is with Bryant, his grandson, and Risa, Alan. I think that's Monica, Risa, and Carl. His service is at St. Patrick's Church. I think it's St. Paul's. St. Peter's. So that might have been my problem giving that to Cindy. St. Peter's, 313 2nd Street Southeast, Saturday morning at 10 a.m. The repast is at 10 a.m. The service is at 11, and then there's a reception afterwards. So Carl, I mean, it's just amazing just to even look out here and not see Carl because he was such a regular at our luncheons. So please keep Carl and his family in your thoughts and prayers, and if you can make it to the service on Saturday, we hope you'll be there. I think that's all my notes. That's it. Thank you, John.
That's, of course, sad news to follow. And if you're thinking of going to the service on Saturday, St. Peter's is on the same block as the Capitol South Metro station, so you can take the Metro down there and avoid parking. Okay. Other member news, some members that are in the news rather than news of members. Ghosts of D.C. recently quoted past Secretary John Richardson and mentioned his book on Alexander Shepard, including the return of the statue. So that's a good thing to point out to everybody. Hopefully everybody has read that book. Let's see. And 2 out of 3 op-eds regarding the Georgia Representative McCormick's proposal to return Alexandria and Arlington to D.C. were from our own AOI members. John Richardson again making news, as well as our AOI board member and historian Nelson Rimensnyder, who's going to be talking to us in just a few minutes. And so moving on, preservation issues, which seems to be in the news constantly now. At this point, there are so many lawsuits and groups. It's almost easier to get involved in this by going to the DC Preservation League's website because they are keeping track of all of these issues. If you don't know how to get to that website, come and contact us afterwards and I can get you that website info. Briefly, over 2,000 people submitted comments to the National Capital Parks Commission opposing the painting of the Eisenhower Executive Office Building. So a hearing on a preliminary injunction will be held in the U.S. District Court for the D.C. today at 2 p.m. So hopefully good news will come from that. National Capital Planning Commission will hold a hearing on the infamous arch at its meeting on June 4th. For more information on how to submit comments or to sign up to testify in person or virtually, you can go to the NCPC website, and that's not up there, but it is ncpc.gov/participate. And if you go there, you can make comments that will be part of the record. And finally, the courts have ordered a halt to the construction of the above-grade East Wing addition until the project receives congressional authorization. However, D.C. Court of Appeals has permitted construction to continue pending a hearing that's scheduled for June 5th at 9:30 a.m. at the Court of Appeals, so keep your fingers crossed on that as well. So on the good side of preservation, a few things that have been saved or restored, opening of several sites. The fountain at Meridian Hill, Malcolm X Park is now running again, which everybody is happy about. On May 22nd, the gardens up, the Haupt Gardens over at the Smithsonian are up and running again. On April 24th, the Carousel, which I and my son spent an inordinate amount of time when he was young at the Carousel in front of the Smithsonian Castle, which it's great that that's back up and running as well. And the Arts and Industries building on June 16th, and I'm not sure what's happening on June 16th because these were Cindy's notes, but something is happening on June 16th at the Arts and Industries building, which is right where the Carousel and the castle are. So it's great to see some preservation, some good news about preservation and not just all of the old news about preservation. Some other member news, or AOI news, we were continuing to have a scanner available for all of you who are interested to scan your artifacts, your documents, your photos. That will be available in upcoming meetings here at our lunch meetings. So if you have anything that you want to digitize and preserve, bring those in and we can help you scan those. It will be in our archives and then you'll have a digital copy of those as well for eternity. So keep that in mind. Also reminding people that our podcast on SoundCloud now has past speakers and new interviews. So that's an ongoing project of our 160-year preservation fund. So going up on those podcasts would be family histories, interviews, DC history projects, research. Anyone who's interested, please contact us and we can get you plugged in to participate in our podcast effort. And our preservation fund, our William Brown Preservation Fund, looking to digitize remaining analog tape recordings of all of our presentations. So thank you to all who've contributed to the fund. This will be an ongoing project and an ongoing fundraiser with the hope of saving and digitizing all of AOI's crucial documents and artifacts. And as part of our preservation efforts, we've been getting to know some of AOI's own history. And, oh, forgot to change this one. So, Nelson, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Well, Memorial Day is Monday. When I grew up in Philadelphia a long time ago, it was called Decoration Day. And after the Civil War, some military people, union, said we should have a special day in May to put flowers on the graves of those who died defending the Union. And so it was called Decoration Day. And it was celebrated, in different communities, more fervently than in others. It really got going again after the First World War. And in the 50s and 60s, there was a movement to change it to Memorial Day and to honor all those who served in all the wars. And and now it's on Monday because somewhere along the line there they made it a 3-day weekend, so people can go to the beach and go out and buy and go to the stores and buy a lot of merchandise. And so it's not, originally it was the 30th of May was its designation. Wherever it fell during the week or weekend or whenever it fell, that was Memorial Day. Well, that's no longer true. Now, this gentleman, as I was talking to people, I testify on the Hill for DC voting rights. So I always look for examples of people in the district who served their country in times of war and were not represented in Congress. In this case, he didn't even have full, citizenship. He was, living in a segregated city. Christian Fleetwood. Now, we're also indirectly honoring the Association of Oldest Inhabitants Incorporated. He was a member. Now, some of you know or don't know, this organization didn't admit black members for many, many years. So, and so those who were, here for many years from the African American community formed their own organization. And how do we know that Fleetwood was a member of it? Well, there was this announcement in the Evening Star, 1916. Eulogies of deceased members, addresses of eulogies for its deceased members were features of the meeting last Monday of the Oldest Inhabitants Association, Colored, Incorporated of the District of Columbia. The meeting was held at the Catholic Beneficial Hall. 15 members had died in the last 2 years and were announced. Among them was Major C.A. Fleetwood. And he might have even been a founding member of the organization. We're, still doing a lot of research on the other organization. And I'm losing my course. He was a sergeant major, and he volunteered Well, I'll start out with 25 African Americans received the Medal of Honor during the Civil War, the Congressional Medal of Honor. 14 of them at the Battle of Chaffin's Farm, just outside Richmond, Virginia, in September 1864. One of those brave men was Christian Fleetwood. Fleetwood was born in 1840 and of were free, African Americans who were free. Received an excellent early education for his time. And in August 1863, Fleetwood enlisted in the 4th Regiment of the United States Colored Infantry. Being so educated for his time, he was immediately promoted to the rank of Sergeant Major. The new regiment saw most of its action in the Richmond-Petersburg campaign, taking part in the Second Battle of Petersburg, June 1864, an infamous Battle of the Crater, 1 month later. Some of you who are more familiar with the battles will know more about some of these battles. The Crater was really something else. And he was particularly recognized for the Battle of Chaffin's Farm, the outskirts. And President Johnson actually presented the medal to Fleetwood personally. And so that was a real a major thing at his time. And okay. This is Fleetwood and his bride.
I know what a sergeant is, and I know what a major is. What's a sergeant grade?
Anybody know?
It's the
Yeah,
top enlisted rank.
it's a top enlisted rank.
Yeah, it's an E9.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. There you go. This is his bride, Sarah Iredell. She was from a very well-connected black family here, an interracial family in the District of Columbia. And a little information on her real quickly. The question, the trivia question, which is really not trivial, will be about Sarah, his wife, Sarah Iredell. We'll end with that. He delivered several times a speech that he wrote about called "The Negro as a Soldier." He finished it about 1900. It's 45,000 words. It's pretty long. He gave parts of it at various times before the Association of Oldest Inhabitants Incorporated, the black organization. He did a lot of research, particularly on the Revolutionary period and one of the black soldiers in that period. It's very interesting. I don't know if Ken Burns consulted his work or not. It's really quite interesting. He ended his treatise with this summary paragraph. History documents the fact that in every war so far known in this country, it was up till 1900, the first blood, and in some cases the last also, has been shed by the faithful Negro. And this in spite of the bondage and oppression and of wrongs unspeakable. Under the sun, there's nothing more known in the history of any people more marvelous than this service. From 1908 until his death in 1914, he and his daughter, who I'll get into, talk about her, lived at 1419 Swan Street, Northwest. Eat it up? Okay. Prior to that, the family lived at 319 U Street. You can visit U Street. It's very interesting. It's a historic, black historic district. Edith Fleetwood, if we have a picture of her, when I get it up. Whoops. Oh, darn it. Well, this is his grave site out in Maryland. Christian Fleetwood, Medal of Honor, Sergeant Major, U.S. Colored Troops of the War. Come on. Okay, this is where he's living on Swan Street. That's his wife, or just before she died. This is his wife, Sarah, and his daughter, Edith. And there's Fleetwood there in the back. Edith was born in 1884 in District of Columbia. She was a daughter of Christian Fleetwood, as I said, and his wife, Sarah. She taught in the D.C. public schools and roomed for a number of years with her cousin, Laura, who was also a teacher. And she lived until 1971 in the District of Columbia. She was well in her age, 87, 88 years old. And so it was complicated times, very complicated, interracial, families, and of course slavery was a big issue, part of it. And so the question is about, show you how complicated the times were. The question, trivia question, as I say, not very trivial, is Fleetwood's wife, Sarah, was a great-granddaughter of a notorious early vice president of the United States who killed a founding father in a duel. Name the vice president. Well, I should have said raise the hands. Who got it? Back here? Aaron Burr? Aaron Burr. Okay. And he's just, you're a visiting member? Good. You want to join? You got to join now for giving you the award. Okay. That'll show you how complicated it was in those days. How many children that Burr fathered with numerous women we'll never know, I guess, but many. Okay. If you don't have a copy of this, please take it home and read it. There's extra copies back on the mantelpiece. And I wanted to go out to the grave and decorate it, but I didn't make it out to the. So I'm going to try and do it on Veterans Day in November. So I'll report then.
You might all like to know their house on U Street, which is at 319 U Street. I believe it still stands. It has a marker in front of it, and it's on the historic Woodwright Park law. And I love the marker. You been there? I love it. Yeah, so that might be worth a visit. I want to go there myself to see it. They're such a remarkable family. And the other thing I would say is that all of their papers, including his lifelong diary, are at the Library of Congress. And I think that his diary has been transcribed, so you can easily read it. I'm not sure if you can read it online. I haven't got that one yet. But that he was an incredibly remarkable man, a musician. He directed 4 different church choirs in Washington, including the 15th Street Presbyterian, St. Mary's, and I forget the other two, but they used to next door neighbors were gun bars, all of our gun bars. And so if Edith lived until 1971, I'm wondering if any of our members might have heard of her or known people who did her in those white parts.
And he kept a diary throughout his life, beginning with his service in the Civil War. So that hasn't even begun to be looked at.
Great. Great. Thank you, Nelson. Thank you, Lisa. Going to run through two real quick things before we introduce our speaker. One that's very, very, very important is elections. Please remember to vote. If you're a registered DC voter, you should have received your ballot by now. And if you're a registered voter, you should have also received a flyer from the elections board about ranked choice voting. So if you have any questions about ranked choice voting, there's information on there that will give you resources to make sure that you do that right and that your vote counts. It's very, very, very important to vote. So please look for those ballots and remember to vote. And one last announcement, at Walter Pierce Park on Saturday, the 23rd at 11 a.m., at the Ancestors Pavilion, and we've spoken about that. Okay. Well then, we will just move on, and we'll talk about that at our next meeting. And at this point, I'm going to turn this over to Pat Clark to introduce our featured presentation for today.
Welcome, everyone. Today's presentation, Three Generations of Washington Women, is another in our series about families in D.C. that have made multi-generational contributions to the area. Rebecca Boggs Roberts is an award-winning educator, author, and leading historian on American women's suffrage and civic participation. As an aside, my first encounter with the Boggs family was in New Jersey many years ago. I went to a meeting about battered women's shelters. It had something to do with my job. And her aunt, Barbara Boggs Sigmund, was there. She was a freeholder in New Jersey. So she and I had tea afterwards, so I had a little chance to get to know her. Years later, my next interaction with the family was when Rebecca gave a presentation here at AOI about suffragism. And subsequent to that, our village, if you're familiar with villages, Glover Park Village, had her come and speak about suffragism as well as the challenges of doing research on women in history. There's not as much easily available as there is on men. And also, she gave this presentation to our village a week or two ago. Sorry. Her books include one on Edith Wilson, Untold Power, The Suffragist Playbook, Suffragists in Washington, D.C., and Historic Congressional Cemetery. Her next book is about a powerful and historic woman, an accomplished woman, and it'll come out next year. Currently, she's the director of the Library of Congress, director of events. Her bona fides for this position include that she has been an event planner, as well as an historian, a journalist, and a political consultant. She's also been a forensic anthropologist, a producer, a tour guide, and a radio show host. And she's been a jazz singer, or is a jazz singer. So I thought maybe her next presentation to us could be a jazz concert. She'll be signing copies of her suffragism book, one of her books, in the back afterwards, if anybody would like to get one. It also turns out that we're neighbors. Rebecca lives in Washington, D.C. with her husband, 3 sons, and a long-eared hound dog. Rebecca?
Thank you all so much, and thank you for welcoming me here. Before I forget, I would be remiss as an employee of the Library of Congress if I did not mention the By the People movement. You mentioned the diary that may or may not be transcribed. If you are interested in transcribing historical documents at the Library of Congress, being able to read cursive is your superpower. So there is a whole program, and you can choose which records group you want to work on if you want to help transcribe historical documents. We are able to use AI to do a first pass, but humans need to do the deeper cut. So it's called By the People, and I highly recommend it if you want to get involved in sort of a citizen science historian project at the Library of Congress. Sorry, I'm trying to make this be a tall person's microphone, but it's dropping down. Okay, so I am delighted to be able to talk about my mom, Cokie Roberts, pioneering journalist, and my grandmother, Lindy Boggs, member of Congress from Louisiana and the U.S. ambassador to the Vatican in the Clinton administration. I'm sure several of you had the chance to meet or know one or both of them, in which case, lucky you. They were both extraordinary women. I miss them both every day. And I have to say, there is a longer line of kind of badass women that goes back many generations, but they were not Washingtonians. The family came to Washington because of politics, like so many do. So I will tell that story. When you have a family like mine, sometimes your family pictures are screenshots from C-SPAN. I went looking for pictures of the three of us together. First of all, you can tell we get bigger every generation. But also this turned up, and it made me laugh. I can't even remember what conference this was where we appeared together. It was always a delight. You can see that they're cracking me up, which they both did on the regular. So my grandmother was born Lindy Claiborne on a plantation in Point Cokie Parish, Louisiana in 1916, so before the 19th Amendment was ratified. The Claibornes, long political history in the Claiborne family going back to Jamestown. And my grandmother was this very well-connected, well-known debutante, also really, really smart, and went to college at 16 to Newcomb, which was the women's school of Tulane, and became involved in the school newspaper where she met Hale Boggs. Hale Boggs was not fancy at all. He was a country kid from the Gulf Coast of Mississippi, but he was the smartest kid ever to be, in the high school of that little town in Gulf Coast, Mississippi, and everyone kind of got together to make sure that he could go to college, recommended him for scholarships, paid his bus fare, got that smart kid to Tulane. And he also worked on the school newspaper, which I'm delighted to tell you is still called the Hullabaloo. And so Lindy and Hale met, this is in the 30s, and they were also both politically involved. So it was Huey Long era in Louisiana. They were young, idealistic reformers who were part of the Clean Up the Long Machine movement. There are some great stories. My grandmother wrote a memoir. It's called Washington Through a Purple Veil, and I'll tell you why it's called that. After she finished it, she said, "Darling, think what a great book I could have written if I had told the truth." So you must take this with a grain of salt. However, if you want some wonderful stories, especially about just post-World War II Washington and the crazy protocol that still held sway in those days, my grandmother is a terrific storyteller, even if she takes some liberties. But she tells some stories in here about when they first met. My grandfather said, I'm going to marry you, when they first had a dance. And she was like, "Stop it, you're ridiculous." And she had plenty of beaux. Of course she did. But he wore her down, and they were, because she went to college so young, they were in their early 20s. And as part of this reform movement, Hale ran for Congress. He was 25, as young as you can be, to become a member of the House of Representatives. And he won. And they came here to Washington. This picture is a little bit later because my mom was not born at that point. My mom was the third child. But you can see my Aunt Barbara, who Pat referred to, and my Uncle Tommy Boggs, who I'm sure some of you knew as well. They come to, and isn't this an amazing 40s photo, right? My grandfather's hat and my grandmother's shoes and the whole look. And this is clearly a campaign picture posed on the steps of the Capitol. But so they came here to Washington. This is 1941. And they were so young, and they had these two little babies. And my grandmother wanted to be involved. She was very campaign savvy. She was terrific at smoothing the feathers that my grandfather ruffled. And she was also, she had great political instincts, so she wanted to be very involved in the issues, but, you know, had these little kids. So one day, my grandfather called her and said, "You really ought to come down and watch this debate. We're debating Lend-Lease." And it's such an interesting, creative way to help the Allies in World War II without sending troops. And just as a student of politics, you should just watch this debate. And my grandmother, you know, she describes it in her book. She's wearing a skirt and sweater. She goes down to the Capitol. She's 23. And she goes to the committee hearing room and says, "I'm Mrs. Boggs. I'd like to watch the debate." And the sergeant says, "Sure, honey." And she said, "No, really, I'm the wife of a congressman." And he's like, "Uh-huh." So sends her away. And she's demoralized and embarrassed, and but also, if any of you knew my grandmother, not willing to let that stand. So went home, put on a very sophisticated black suit, put on a hat, put on her high heels, put on her gloves, went to the department store millinery counter, which existed, asked them to drape her hat with a purple veil, because an older hostess in town had told her that was the most sophisticated thing a woman in Washington could wear. And right there with her wearing it, they draped a purple veil over her hat. She went back to the Capitol, took off her gloves, and very smartly said, "I'm Mrs. Boggs, and I'd like to be seated." "Right this way, ma'am." So she told that story as an early example of, like, know the game you're playing, right? Washington's got its rules. If you learn them and master them, you will succeed. And she was a master. My grandfather actually lost re-election after that first moment in Congress. And by then, we were more involved in World War II, so he enlisted in the Navy. He went from being the youngest member of Congress to being the oldest ensign in the Navy. And my mother was born, and then when the war was over, he ran for that seat again and was elected again and never lost. So they came back to Washington. This is a slightly later picture. Now you can sort of see the 50s, right? My grandmother's gloves and the pumps and the hat, the whole thing. And when they first moved back here, they would spend 6 months in Washington and 6 months in New Orleans. And that's crazy. But it worked for the two girls because they were going to Sacred Heart schools in both places. They went to Stone Ridge here and Sacré-Cœur there. So it was the same curriculum, and they could kind of jump from semester to semester. It did not work for my Uncle Tom at all. He went to Georgetown Prep here and didn't have a equivalent curriculum in New Orleans. So the older they got and the more kind of entrenched their life was here in Washington, the family decided they'd stay here in Washington full-time and they'd buy a house. Now, my sons, who were raised in Glover Park, do not let me say I am a Washington native because I grew up in Bethesda. But let me tell you, in my grandmother's words, about them moving to Bethesda. One cold day, we went out to see a house on Bradley Boulevard in Bethesda, Maryland. I drove such a long distance that I felt I was on the other side of the planet. Let me tell you, this house is 5 miles from where we're standing right now, but okay, Mama. But the neighborhood was within striking distance of my children's schools. So Stone Ridge and Georgetown Prep are even further out. We found a pretty white brick house with a southern-looking columns across the front, set in a large, well-landscaped yard. Guarding its entrance were 2 enormous weeping willow trees. If you squinted, their branches resembled Spanish moss hanging from southern live oak trees. I went around inspecting the house and talking with the agent while the kids ran all over it. When I returned to the living room, there was Cokie, who was 8, still in her snowsuit, sprawled in the middle of the floor. She announced, "I like it here, I feel at home here, I want to live in this house, Mama." I said, "But darling, it doesn't have a back stairway, and that's important when there are children in a house where there's going to be lots of entertaining." I don't care. The bathrooms are much too small. I don't care. The dining room is small too. It would be hard for us to have a big family meal, much less give a party. I don't care. There isn't enough closet space. I don't care what you say. I love this house. I'm going to tell my daddy to buy this house. The enterprising agent called Hale in his office on Monday and said, I have a house that your little daughter is dying to live in. So, of course, they bought the house. There's the weeping willow tree. There's my grandparents in front of the house. I also grew up in this house. My parents got married in the yard. I just found out Jeffrey Slavin crashed my parents' wedding in the yard when he was a teenager. My dad still lives in this house on Bradley Boulevard. There is still a weeping willow tree in the front yard. It still has terrible bathrooms and no back staircase. So my mother's family starts sort of digging into Washington. My grandfather rose up through the Democratic ranks to become majority leader. My grandmother ran all of his campaigns and was always involved. She was president of the Women's National Democratic Club, among other things. And this is how my mother also wrote a memoir. My mother also managed to not give away anything personal in her own memoir. It's quite a trick. This is called We Are Our Mother's Daughters, and it's chapters about her own relationships with women interspersed with little mini bios of women she admires. This is from the chapter called Mother and Daughter. She says, Mama could always be counted on to come through. Intellectually, I knew that she was actually away a lot of the time when we were growing up. She was off campaigning for Daddy or accompanying him on some official trip. She always worked for him, for the party, for the community. Even so, as I resurrect those childhood pictures in my memory, they all include Mama. To me, she was the most beautiful woman on earth, and she seemed a constant presence. When I was little, I used to fake being sick so I could stay home and play with her. She knew what I was doing, but never let on. Now I realize how many cancellations and rearrangements must have followed in the wake of my announcement that I didn't quite feel up to going to school that day. By the way, when my grandmother was older and her grandchildren could do no wrong, we would also occasionally skip school to play with her, but it was at her invitation. And she would say to my mother, "Oh, darling, let the other children catch up." Mama always seemed to be able to do 6 things at once, so we and everyone else asked her to do everything. She had such incredible patience. She made all the curtains in the house, most of them complicated silk draperies with linings. Keep in mind, this was a woman who worked. For the den, she chose a chintz hunting scene and carefully cut and sewed it so the hands, horses' heads, dogs' tails, and whips connected exactly from one panel to the next when the curtains were closed. Not only would I never have the skill to do that, I would have killed myself or someone else as I became completely exasperated in the effort. So the kids grew up. My Aunt Barbara went to Manhattanville College. My Uncle Tom went to Georgetown, so they've both gone to Catholic schools. My mother, also whip smart, wanted the sort of serious intellectual atmosphere of a Seven Sisters education, so she went to Wellesley. My grandmother despaired. She said she was sending her baby to a Protestant Yankee Republican school. But while at Wellesley, my mother met her own not well-connected working class guy. He was not a country kid from Mississippi. He was a Jewish kid from Bayonne, New Jersey. They were also very involved in student politics together. And they also got married right out of school. My dad wrote for the New York Times right after graduation, and my mom was kind of caught in between women's movements, you know? They graduated from college in 1964. They had both been very taken with the Kennedy administration. My mother had this example of her mother working, but not officially, and my mother sort of thought should be home full-time and volunteering for a million things and doing good things in the community, but she also intellectually very much wanted to work, and you know, the second wave feminism was starting to really get women to question why they wanted to stay home and what that life was like. And my mom realized pretty quickly, even in her early 20s, that intellectually she really had to work, and financially as well. So when my dad was, when they were living in Manhattan, my dad worked for the Times, and my brother was born there in '68. My mom started working for a business newsletter, but it was very much still my dad's job that dictated things. In fact, she, until the day she died, told a story on my dad that they lived on the West Side, and at one point they were at a party and someone asked them where they lived, and my dad said, "Oh, it just makes so much more sense for us to live on the West Side because I work at the Times. If I worked at, like, you know, Esquire, that building would be really inconvenient." And my mom says, "I work in the Esquire building." My dad had no idea. He had picked it at random. So she never let him forget it. So her career was very much second to his, but it was a career. And then in late '68, beginning of '69, when my brother was a baby, the Times sent my dad to LA. He was all of 25, but the Times very much felt that a young reporter should be covering the youth movement of the late '60s, early '70s, and the whole counterculture exploding on the West Coast. Should not be covered by, you know, a Greatest Generation member in New York. So my parents moved to LA. Oh, this is my grandfather and my mom standing in the house at Bradley Boulevard on the wedding that Jeffrey crashed. So I was born in LA. This is also, check out my brother's shirt tie combo. It's awesome. My brother is now the chancellor of the University of North Carolina. I would like to torture him with this photo. And right around this time, early '70s, my grandfather was campaigning for a member of Congress from Alaska named Nick Begich. He was up in Alaska. And of course, you know, campaigning in a state that size, you go place to place in little planes. And they went up in a Cessna that never came down. The plane is still missing. The 4 people aboard, my grandfather, Congressman Begich's aide, and the pilot were all lost. The search was massive. The Coast Guard came out. In fact, the search was so massive that they ended up rewriting the map of the coastline of Alaska. But nothing was ever found. So my grandfather was declared absent for the next election. He was elected, he had been on a campaign trail. It was October of '72. He was elected in absentia that year, but by the beginning of '73, the district needed a member. And the very obvious choice was my grandmother. She had run his campaigns forever. She had, you know, no one knew the district better or the constituents better. She was beloved. And everyone tried to convince her to run. The party wanted her to run. And she was hesitant. She had never had the front role before. She had always been, you know, the good woman behind the powerful man. And because her skill was consensus building and smoothing ruffled feathers, that's a little harder when you're the decision maker. My Aunt Barbara told her there's no maybe button in Congress, right? You're going to have to choose yes or no. But ultimately, it was obvious she was the right choice, and she ran for that seat in that special election, and she also never lost. She held that seat until she retired. This is her being sworn in by President Nixon. She was a terrific member of Congress. I would like to point out that the matriarchy in my family is not just my mother and grandmother. This is my other Aunt Barbara, my Uncle Tommy's wife Barbara, who some of you may know, and my cousin Elizabeth. They both also still live here in town, and we're all in and out of each other's business quite a lot. And it's a good thing that my grandmother sort of had this new role and new responsibility, because everybody was starting to leave Washington, at least temporarily. My dad, the New York Times sent us to Athens. My dad was responsible for Greece, Turkey, and Cyprus. I was an extremely well-traveled 6-year-old. And my mother that was the time she was home the most with us, but she also had told CBS, you know, I'm available for freelance if you need someone in Athens. And then there was a coup. So there was my mom on the ground, and she was filing radio reports for CBS Radio about the coup in Greece. And so when we moved back to Washington in '77, she had a radio reel. We moved back into the house on Bradley Boulevard. My grandmother moved to Connecticut Avenue, where I understand her neighbors are here tonight, or this afternoon. And so I then grew up in that house as well. My mom didn't know what she would do professionally. She had been hesitant to move back here. She knew once she was here she'd never leave. She was all of like 33 at this point. And my brother and I were in school full time. We started in 2nd and 4th grade in Montgomery County Public Schools. And my dad was in the newsroom at the New York Times, and a new colleague was sitting next to him, and she had just started, and they were chit-chatting about where they had come from, and she said, I just left National Public Radio. And my dad said, what's National Public Radio? And she said, oh, it's this new network. It's only been around for a couple of years. They're really doing interesting stuff. And he says, does this mean your job's open? And she said, it is. Get your wife's resume to a woman named Nina Totenberg. And my dad literally walked my mom's resume over to the old NPR headquarters on M Street. Nina aced it in, and Nina and Linda Wertheimer and my mom became fast friends starting in '77, lifelong friends. Neither Nina nor Linda have kids, so we were sort of, they're definitely my tantes, still dear, dear friends of mine, and were dear friends of my mom's her whole life. So they actually, this is a publicity picture from the '70s, as you can tell from Linda's tragic granny look. But they recreated this picture years later. So Lindy's in Congress, mom's at NPR, dad's at the Times. My brother and I are growing up here in Washington. I went straight through Montgomery County Public Schools, graduated from Whitman. My brother decided Whitman was too big and anonymous for him and graduated from Georgetown Prep. People ask me sometimes what it was like to grow up with a famous mom, and she wasn't when I was in high school. She started at the Brinkley Show, and the Brinkley Show, do you all remember this, on Sunday mornings? She started as a panelist in the late 80s and became a regular, and then she and Sam Donaldson took over not until 1989, and by then I was in college. So while people knew her voice from NPR, they weren't stopping her in the grocery like they would be after she went on TV, and by then I was grown. I went to Princeton in part because my Aunt Barbara Sigmund was the mayor of Princeton. She had 3 sons, really, really eager for a daughter. As the mother of 3 sons myself, I now get it entirely. And she talked up Princeton so much to me. Her husband was a professor there. So I started there. She wore an eye patch because she had had an earlier bout with ocular cancer. And my Aunt Barbara, y'all, she was my Auntie Mame. She was fabulous and hilarious. And when she lost her eye, she actually got a glass eye, and she hated the way it looks. And everyone in town knew she had lost an eye, so she just decided to accessorize with eye patches that matched her outfit. She had one with like peacock feathers, and some had sequins, and they were monogrammed, and people started making her eye patches, and it was a whole thing. She was very, very cool. My junior year of college, her cancer metastasized, and she died in the fall of '91. As she was dying, my grandmother decided to resign from Congress because she felt that she couldn't be in New Jersey enough. And everyone discouraged her. They said, you know, your whole support system is there. You're going to regret it once you leave. And she said, this is more important. I'm not going to get another chance to be with my dying daughter. So she retired and really very much didn't want to be one of those former members who hangs around Washington. So after Barbara died, she moved back to New Orleans full time. She had inherited a house on Bourbon Street. When I would tell people my grandmother lived on Bourbon Street, they were like, "And what does your grandmother do?" But right around the time she ran in her own right in the early 70s, she inherited this crazy 17th century house right in the heart of the French Quarter, Bourbon between Toulouse and St. Peter, that her aunt Frosty, the name, it's all a William Faulkner novel, y'all. Frosty's sisters, Eustacia and Rowena and Corinne, who were all flappers and full bathtub gin, this family. So Lindy went back to New Orleans and lived on Bourbon Street largely. And Mom was getting more and more famous. And after college, I met Dan. And it was obvious that we also should get married at that house at Bradley Boulevard. So here's me in front of those white columns with my 4 flower girls. You have a big family. You have a lot of little cousins. My parents had 1,500 people at their wedding. I got away with only having 700. So, Jeffrey, you could have crashed mine too. No one would have known. This littlest child, I'm actually flying tonight to go see in London because she's got a new baby. And the second one with the dark brown curls is dog sitting for me while I'm gone. So we are all still very much in each other's lives. It's the benefit of a big rowdy family that's all in your business, but this matriarchy thing is real and extends to the next generation for sure. This is a picture of the 3 of us at my wedding. After a few years of retirement, President Clinton decided that my grandmother should be the U.S. ambassador to the Vatican. And my grandmother was very good at hiding how powerful she actually was. She said, "Darling, it's what I do best. I go to church and I go to parties." But meanwhile, she was, encouraging the Pope to consider female ordination. We did go over there. Having a grandmother who lives in Rome is a good deal. And we went over there several times, including for the millennium. So, the pomp and circumstance of the Vatican is often way over the top. But that moment when 1999 turned to 2000, that over-the-top circumstance felt absolutely appropriate. So we all showed up. Huge batch of cousins and aunts and uncles. Dan and I had been married for about 1.5 years, but we didn't have kids yet. And he and my dad, who is Jewish, were the only non-Catholics or not even partial Catholics in this crew. And Dan, trying to get it right, but had grown up Methodist, says to my grandmother, when we meet the Pope, do I address, like, Your Excellency, Holy Father, what do I say? And my grandmother says, well, I call him darling. Not helpful. But she had a wonderful time in Rome. And we had a wonderful time visiting her there. And I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on me and who I am in this 3rd generation, but one of the nice things about your mom writing a memoir, even if it's a little bit fake, is that sometimes you get to read what she says about you. So in her chapter on mothers and daughters, she says, so my mom wrote this just about this time when Lindy was moving to Rome and I had just gotten married but didn't have kids yet. My mother moved to Europe at the end of last year, so it's hard to talk to her more than once a week these days. My daughter and I, on the other hand, talk all the time. I call her, she calls me. We talk about everything from radio to recipes. In watching the women in the family, she seems to have taken ingredients from each for her own still stewing gumbo. She loves the political world of my mother, and for a few years worked producing radio and television commercials for candidates. She loves the intellectual and brain-teasing world of Steve's mother, so she joins book clubs and pores over crossword puzzles. She loves my world of journalism. She's hosted her own cable TV show and now produces and reports for radio. Becca eased into the reporting part of her job, and I gently teased her about it not too long ago, asking her if she had noticed that she's now a public radio reporter. She replied, I know, and the truth is I love it. And is really good at it, her proud mother might add. She loves the domestic world of all of us and creates wonderful concoctions in the kitchen. She comes home from her demanding duties for the holidays to make the big family celebrations possible. She decorates, shops, wraps, and cooks with me, keeping me laughing all the while. She gives her new mother-in-law some giggles as well in a relationship that's sure to blossom over the years. She's one of the most competent, smart, funny people I've ever met. And I know we all adore our kids, and she, take that with the grain of salt that a mother's view has, but I have taken that legacy very seriously. We lost my mom, almost 7 years ago now, if you can believe it. She died in September of 2019. I was a public radio reporter for a while, and then I had 3 little boys, and journalism was changing really fast, and I felt like I was at a moment in my life when I could pivot to a different career. And I, unlike my dad, had not dreamed of being a journalist. And so in my 40s, I went to grad school and pivoted into museum work and coming up with educational and cultural programs in cultural institutions. It's very similar to journalism in a lot of ways. And started at the Smithsonian, worked there for a long time, then had the opportunity to help open the Planet Word Museum, which I hope you all have had a chance to visit, was their inaugural programmer, and then went to work for the Library of Congress about 4 years ago. I try my hardest to tell stories of American women, because of who my mother and grandmother taught me to be, but also stories of DC. I have found that this city kind of becomes a minor character in everything I write. One of the books that Pat mentioned is the story of the 1913 suffrage parade, which was sort of the first civil rights march on Washington. Washington is very much part of that story, not just because the suffragists wanted to march through the federal corridor, but also all the organizing and city dynamics and the local police and all of that very much had to do with their strategy. And then my biography of Edith Wilson, Edith Wilson inherited Galt's Jewelers from her first husband. She was a Washington creature. They had a house on DuPont Circle. She was the first woman in Washington to get a driver's license. She was known for tooling around town in her little electric car, top speed, 15 miles an hour. And she was hesitant to marry the president, in part because she was part of non-federal Washington and didn't want any part of federal Washington. She was happy being a small business owner and a, upstanding citizen of the city. And my next book, which I just finished and is with my editor and it will be published in March, I'm delighted to tell you, is a biography of Rose Cleveland, who was Grover Cleveland's sister. She was his first lady for about a year and a half before he got married. And she was terrible at it. She was a terrible first lady because she was just a giant nerd. And the whole ceremonial social side of first ladying did not come naturally to her at all. And she told the Washington Post that while she was hosting reception, she was conjugating Greek verbs in her head to pass the time. Rose was a piece of work. Rose also had a lifelong relationship with a woman. We've had a gay first lady, and people don't know that. As soon as she got out of the White House, she led an extraordinary life that I'm really looking forward to you all being able to read about when my book comes out next year. So that is the legacy my mom and grandma have left me. I am so proud to be the latest in these strong women. I'm not even the latest because the next generation is there and doing wonderful things. I only have sons, but I expect them to produce daughters and carry this legacy on. Thank you all so much. And there's a gentleman in the back of the room with a microphone if anybody has questions.
Off topic, but I portray Mrs. Cleveland in my Cleveland Park, and she was a formidable woman. I'm
Frances, yeah,
surprised-
she was for
Frances-
sure.
Frank Cleveland.
Yeah.
So, but now you've topped it with Rose.
Well, they were friends. So Frances Cleveland, Grover married Frances. He was 49, she was 21, in the middle of his first term, in an effort to have a little vague approximation of a normal family life. They bought a house in what is now Cleveland Park because, of course, the realtors were like, capitalize on that Cleveland name. At the time, the streetcar wasn't finished. The cathedral wasn't there. It was the country. The property where they lived was, the house doesn't survive. It's where Margaret Lenzner lives now, if you all know Margaret. And then when, he was the first non-consecutive president, when they came back in the second term, that house had been sold. So they rented Woodley House, which is now Murray. And all my kids went to Murray. So, yeah. But Frances was a very interesting lady. She was much better at being First Lady than Rose was.
I've read she was the Jackie Onassis of her
She
time.
was. She absolutely was. She was stylish. She was sort of the first celebrity First Lady. And in fact, rules had to be put in place because people would put her image on products to sell them without her knowledge or consent.
Exactly.
Yeah. What else can I answer for people? In the back over there.
This is more of a comment than a question. You said that some guy crashed wedding at your house. Yes. Well, I've been to your house also, and I went to visit your mom and your dad, along with Adam Clayton Powell III, who was at NPR at the time.
Yep.
And Phyllis Crockett, who was a correspondent, and she invited me for dinner. And your family was so generous. She was a young reporter covering Mandela's South African experience, and your mom gave her a great deal of advice on how to cover that story. And I'll never forget the wonderful time in front of your house with the columns and all that stuff that we had, and your parents was gracious hosts. So thank you for them.
Thank you. Thank you. I will say my dad still lives in that house alone, which has me a little bit crazy, with the Labrador. My parents' wedding, I'm not kidding about the 1,500 people, and my grandmother cooked. They invited every Democratic member of Congress, but it had, just been the Johnson landslide. So, and Johnson himself, who was president and was an old friend of my grandfather's from when they had served together in Congress, was there. And there's a great story. My first cousin, my mom's nephew, Hale, Thomas Hale Boggs III, was supposed to be the ring bearer, and somehow in the yard he lost the ring. It wasn't tied to the pillow anymore. But the president always travels with a physician, and the physician had one of those little look-in-your-ear lights. He found the ring in the grass. Yes, Jeffrey.
So I think related to the last one, why don't you tell me a little bit about how you were during Proctors and your grandmother too was great civil rights leaders. He was like the only Democrat.
Well, he was a hesitant civil rights leader. My grandfather So he asked if I could talk a little bit about my grandparents' role in the civil rights movement. My grandfather was, you know, a Democrat in the segregated South. He signed the Southern Manifesto. If you read his Wikipedia entry, it will describe him as a segregationist. My grandmother grew up on a plantation in Point Cokie Parish. Her family had been slaveholders generations back. This is a legacy that everyone in the family is very aware of. My grandfather learned. In the Voting Rights Act of 1964, he decided he was going to vote for it, but not make a speech. And there was a family dinner the night before where everyone was kind of bullying him to stand up for the bill. And he said, I'm already committing political suicide by voting for it. I'm not going to talk on it. I'm going to leave other people to make those speeches. And then the next day during debate, a fellow Southerner stood up and said there was no racism in the South. And he couldn't let that stand. So my grandfather did end up standing up and speaking on behalf of the Voting Rights Act of 1964. So he was not an activist by any means. He was a slow convert. My grandmother was much more radical, quietly in her own Steel Magnolia way. But my grandmother was actually the last white member of Congress to represent a majority black district, understood what that meant in terms of who her voters and constituents were, and was much more aware of equity issues, access issues, justice issues than Hale had ever been. My grandmother was also much more of a feminist, and when she first went to Congress in the early 70s, there weren't that many women members. There was, Pat Schroeder, Barbara Mikulski, and they purposely divided themselves up so that there was a woman on every committee there could be, regardless of party, because they knew that having a woman in the room would make a difference. And actually, there's a great story. I digress. My grandmother was on the banking committee, and they were debating an equal credit bill that would make it illegal to deny credit based on race, ethnicity, or religion. And my grandmother took the copy of the bill, went into the back room, hand wrote, or sex or marital status on the bill, made copies of her edited version, handed them out to the committee, and said, I know it was just an oversight, darlings. You all never intentionally left women out of the Equal Credit Act. And that is why I can get a credit card in my own name. Yeah.
So I would just, on another note, my mother and I had the great honor of meeting your parents at the Woodrow Wilson House. I think it was a book dedication for one of them. I can't remember. And then I also attended your mom's services at St. Matthew's Cathedral, which were beautiful. And finally, I met you before. It's wonderful how you have described your heritage, your grandmother and your mom, and it sounds like you continue their legacy. And finally, I'm the chair of the Special Events Committee at the Arts Club, and I'd like your jazz group to come and join us for a performance. Thank you.
That is a lovely invitation. I have not sung in a long time. I was a jazz singer when we lived in San Francisco. I sang in an amazing a cappella women's trio. I was the middle voice of three. We had a whole fake sister act where we dressed in 40s clothes and sang really complicated harmonies, and it was so much fun. I haven't done that in a long, long time. And thank you for saying nice things about mom's service. That was the fact that we pulled that off in the time that we had. My brother and I looked at each other like, I think Mom would be impressed and a little surprised that we were able to get that service together.
I want to ask you one final question. Please tell me about your mother's career as an author.
So the question is, can I talk about my mother's career as an author? So this book, We Are Our Mother's Daughters, was my mom's first book, and it was kind of part memoir, part biography. And she loved writing this book. She loved the intellectual exercise of it. She loved the scale of it, having been a Daily Deadline journalist for so long. And she loved the research part of it, which, for even a long-form radio piece, you can't dive that deep. Mom was a nerd, and wore that proudly. And so after the success of that book, her publisher wanted her to keep writing, and she didn't want to keep writing about herself. So she wrote Founding Mothers, which is about the generation of women in the Revolutionary era. And those books are hard, right? Like, I write single life biographies, very, cradle to grave. There's an obvious timeline, there's an obvious narrative. She was writing these interweaving stories of lots of women, some of whom knew each other, some of whom didn't. The success of Founding Mothers led her to kind of keep going. So then she wrote Colonial Dames about the early days of the Republic and the War of 1812 in that era, and then she wrote the Civil War book. His name is escaping me right this second. And was actually thinking about writing a book about the suffrage movement when she died. And I had been helping. Oh, right. So I think I mentioned my dad's Jewish, my mom's Catholic. When they were first living in LA, they started hosting Passover Seder for whoever wanted to honor that holiday, which was a pretty funny mix of people in Malibu in 1969. And so they wrote their own Haggadah, their own Seder service, and it's very groovy. It is peace, love, and Judaism, many years, nobody knows Hebrew. I went through 1 year in high school and took out all the gender-specific references to God, so it's no king of the universe, it's ruler of the universe. But this Haggadah has been what we use at Passover Seder for over 50 years, and it's photocopied, and it's got wine stains in it, and it's a mess, but it's tradition. So if you, probably closer to 10 years ago now, my parents published their Haggadah along with notes about being an interfaith marriage. So, and they did write a book together about their marriage called From This Day Forward as well. Yeah. Thank you all so much.
Before you leave, it is, of course, our tradition to, you are tall. Either that or I'm really short. To give a certificate of appreciation. Thank you so much for coming and speaking to us this afternoon. And I understand there are books in the back.
Yes, I have mainly the suffrage book, but a couple copies of the Edith book.
So get books signed. And as you're getting books signed, I was asked to make one more note having to do with our elections, that Phil Pinnell, an AOI DC member, was the treasurer of the Initiative 83 campaign, which brought ranked choice voting to DC. So if you do have questions about ranked choice voting, you know someone here you can go and ask right away. And please be with us at our next meeting, June 18th. We'll have longtime NBC Channel reporter and native Mark Seagraves will be interviewing Bluegrass Hall of Famer and DC raised Tom Gray. So see you then. Thank you.